Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We're very excited to be presenting our first ever Ops Innovators webinar. So this is the start of a new series that Crunch Time is offering that we'll be hosting throughout the year. And I wanted to just give you a couple of logistics before we get started. We'll be having questions, a Q&A period at the end. So please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box throughout the conversation, and we will get them all answered at the end of the session. That is about it. We will also be sending out a recording of this webinar at the end, I believe tomorrow. So if you want to share it with people in your organization, you're free to do that as well. At this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Steve Larson, who is our success architect at Crunch Time, and he'll be leading the session. Steve, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Cindy. Totally happy to be here with you today. Everybody's busy, and we appreciate you taking time out to spend with us on Crunch Time, and specifically the ROI of ops management. And we're going to get into some neat stuff today. Before I do some introductions of our totally excellent panel, I'll just give you a little background about myself. My name's Steve Larson, success architect. I've been with Crunch Time for about 8.5 years, and I am just as invigorated as ever to continue to talk to people about Crunch Time, pushing the limits of getting the most out of the system. And I think this is a really great topic to explore, and I hope you get a lot out of it. So let me introduce our panel. Actually, before we get to our panel, really quick overview on operations management being our focus today. And what I mean by that is, we've got a lot to offer with the Crunch Time platform. So, if we look at our icon over there, the inventory management, operations execution, labor and scheduling, learning and development, this is us as Crunch Time now. And we will specifically focus on inventory management, labor and scheduling today, but we always like to make sure that people understand that the offering by Crunch Time is quite significant, and we're really proud of that. So let me now get to our panel. And first, let me introduce Chuck Hatfield, who I've been working with for several years. Chuck is the executive chef and VP of culinary at SSP, who's been with Crunch Time for quite a while. And, this is a significant footprint that, that Chuck oversees, particularly in the area of culinary, but really reaching into Crunch Time quite a bit. Working in inventory management in particular, but also using the mobile suite and BizIQ analytics. When you have a big organization like Chuck, with all of the different recipes that he manages and the buying that happens for such a huge entity in the airport space, it's pretty awesome what they do. So we're really happy to have Chuck here to share some thoughts with you. We've also got Michael Matos, who is the Senior Director of Ops Services at SPB Hospitality. So Chuck and Michael are similar in that they've got a lot of complexity, moving parts, different purchasing, different labor scenarios, different inventory management recipes, all this kind of thing. Michael and his team, they do use Crunch Time in addition to inventory management, mobile suite, and BizIQ. They also use Crunch Time for labor and scheduling too. So we'll talk to Michael specifically when we get to the labor area. But real excited to have Michael and Chuck join us today, and like I said, share their perspectives as we talk through this today. Okay, so let's get us started right off the bat. Our objective today is to look at return on investment in consideration of crunch time. And like I said, this is, we're focused on the ops management piece, the purchasing, inventory, and labor, and what specifically we can do to make an impact. So this formula here, it's borrowed, as you might have seen before, the return on investment formula from the financial industry. You take a gain on an investment, you divide it by your cost of investment, and you've got essentially a factor. And the higher the factor, the better. So we've kind of morphed this philosophically into, how can we talk about your results over what your costs are? And we'll talk a little bit about, what we're including as costs, but we're really after results. And so if we can get a higher number on that results and keep that costs, you know, roughly the same. There are going to be things, spending some time on configuration here and there or whatever, but we want to see you get that higher factor, that higher return on investment. So a quick example of what I'm talking about towards the bottom there. So if you've got 200 units with an AUV, $2 million AUV for those locations, and you can run a 2% AVT variance because you're really putting a lot of effort into crunch time and making sure that everything's, running like a top. You bring the AVT variance down to 2% instead of 5%. If you annualize that, you're talking about $12 million to the bottom line. So that, really representing a 3% improvement in COGS because, you're maximizing what you're getting out, return on investment wise. So that's what we're after. We want you to get high results for, keeping costs at level, if you will. So this is the kind of the introduction here of what we're looking at. Now, this, what we have here is your machine. This is your distillery. And the analogy is this is crunch time. This is your crunch time. It's intricate, it's flexible, it's customizable. This is all what you make it. So when we think of that return on investment that we're after, we've got the denominator being the licensing, the configuration, and the quality of transactions, frankly. That is the cost of what you do. The results, so as much as you can squeeze out of that cost into getting the numerator, which is either your actual money saved or the value of time. That sometimes gets into opportunity cost, which is hard to always put your finger on, but we're looking at results. We want dollars, or we want to give you back time if we can. And so results over costs is your ROI. And so our little distillery there shows you that the end result, we want to squeeze every bit we can and, pay attention to your machine so that we get the most out of it. Value drivers. So our machine is it's got a lot, that you can do with it in terms of value drivers. So we've got things that we can help you go faster, that, higher accuracy, making sure that things are correct, setting boundaries for control, orderly transactions, organization, flexibility, and, when we talk to folks like Chuck and Michael, the flexibility and the broad footprint of what they do, that's huge. Consistency, we want everybody kind of marching to the same sheet of music. Accountability is, what happened, and how can we go back and make sure that we're doing things correct. Same thing with compliant. What are your standard operating procedures around operating your machine and making sure that we do this. So all of these value drivers is what we are looking to push on for you to get the most out of crunch time. And at the end of the day, maximizing your value drivers is going to impact and, in fact, increase your return on investment. So we've got our first little opportunity here to ask Michael and Chuck about which value drivers they like most. So let's talk about that. We've got Chuck. Let's have you go first. You'll see throughout as we get feedback from Chuck and Michael. Chuck is CH, Michael is MM, and so Chuck, you've chosen consistency. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Certainly. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for having me share my thoughts about crunch time as it relates to ROI today. I'm going to focus on consistency. I'm going to touch on flexibility. I know Michael's going to speak about that, but for me, in my business, especially here in the US and in Canada, we're using crunch time for almost 400 locations. The challenge we have in our business is of those 400 locations, almost all of them have a different menu. So we're managing almost 15,000 ingredients, almost 40,000 recipes inside the system. And so consistency is a challenge. But I have to say, when you break it down to kind of a simple way to look at things, the simple way you put information into crunch time, starting with purchasing and receiving, production, transfers, waste, inventory, brings consistency throughout a very complicated piece of business throughout the organization. So that's one thing I want to touch on is just the way you use it and use it well. It adds consistency in how you're going to get your reporting, how you're going to do your purchasing, adds a lot of value for those daily, weekly, monthly disciplines. When we dive down into the flexibility piece a little bit, managing 15,000 ingredients seems like a lot, but it really isn't, because we are all able to share ingredients because of the flexibility of crunch time. And what I mean by that is the menu items that we use are the company products. I have one whole milk. I have one boneless pork loin in the system, and I use the inventory unit, and I use it in a way that can be related to all the different ways we purchase throughout my organization. So whatever pack size we might have in San Francisco or in Orlando, Florida, and it can relate that ingredient to the ways that they're buying it, as long as the specification is the same. So that flexibility leads into consistency and allows me to manage things on a much, I'll say, tighter level. Even though 15,000 ingredients seems like a lot, it helps me with that tremendously, because I can now manage the ingredient database on a very consistent level. We attach nutrition to every ingredient that we have inside the system. So it's really important that we manage the size of that and the number of items we have in crunch time. So those are the big highlights that I'd like to share.
Michael, away to you.
Thanks, Steve, and appreciate everybody being on today and giving us some time to share our thoughts about crunch time. Flexibility for SPB and is about having multiple concepts that range from high-end dining to casual steakhouse to breweries. And the flexibility that crunch time provides us is each of those different brands has various approaches to what they count on their inventory, how they calculate their preps along the way, even how do we account for brewing beer and then selling it to the guests. So crunch time has allowed us to have the flexibility to tailor those modules within the system to the specific needs of each of our brands. So some brands count prep, some brands are chef driven, and they are same day. They make everything same day, so they don't count prep. And the flexibility to design what their counts look like and what we need from them allows us to manage 14 different brands that do treat food and their COGS slightly differently.
That's awesome. Okay, thanks, Chuck and Michael, for those initial comments, kind of overarching thoughts. And when we talk about, this is something I just wanted to reiterate, when you talk about the control and maximizing, you as a customer are in control of your ROI factor. How much can you get after these value factors and making your, the analogy of the distillery, how good can you make your machine so you're in control, maximizing the value drivers so that you can constantly improve. And the asterisk is, we're, especially, once you, well, throughout the entire process of implementation, but with customer success, we're here to help you continue to maximize. We continue to develop our products, and we're gonna be there to help you to continue to maximize. So I wanted to get that out there. And as far as the specifics, so now we've got a little cycle that we want to take you through, focusing on purchasing, inventory, COGS, labor, and sales. And so we're going to take you through specific value drivers. This is where Chuck and Michael will share some specifics, things that they're using that they really find value in. And then I'm going to go into I guess it's kind of my opinion on what I think a specific metric is. One of the most specific metrics is for each of these areas. And Michael and Chuck can, they can feel free to jump on top of that and comment as well. So let's start with purchasing. And the plan here is to share some things that provide value. So purchasing value drivers. Please feel free to read through these, but Michael and Chuck are going to share some of their favorites. So Michael, why don't I turn over to you for your favorites here?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. E-invoices being remediated continuously is a really big deal for us. It allows us to have real-time knowledge of what our on-hands are within the restaurants. It allows price adjustments to take place so that we get real and accurate COGS with each delivery calculation. And it also allows us to evaluate if purchases are out of compliance. In other words, we get a sub that hasn't been approved in the past. I'm alerted through CDP, and I can go to supply chain and ensure that this is approved. And if it is not approved, we can instruct the restaurants to kick it back to the delivery. And that kind of works hand in hand with purchasing post restrictions. And by those restrictions, I mean, if a restaurant has an invoice that's outstanding that hasn't been reconciled or is still awaiting to come into the system, the restaurant can't post their inventory. And that allows us to ensure that our COGS stay consistent, that as expenditures hit the correct post period, so that we won't have large swings or bounce backs along the way that cause confusion within the restaurants. So those two purchasing value drivers really have a great impact at SPB.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that, the bid sheets electronically integrated is a really great tool for me in the business. Having the costs of all those ingredients that I mentioned up to date, and we're able to utilize them not only to keep the inventories up to date, but again, going back to how I set up the ingredients, when we go to refresh menus, I have the latest, greatest cost in the market that we're refreshing that menu in. So it's a huge benefit for us to continually maintain and update our menus and make sure that we're running as efficient cost as possible. The vendor orders, even though my initials aren't by it, it's a huge thing. To have the B2B integration for vendor ordering is a tremendous asset, in that it creates the purchase order automatically, the electronically sent to the vendor, and then piggybacking onto what Michael was saying, and then having an e-invoice come in to take on and adjust all the things that Michael mentioned, including, I think, catch weights is another big thing for us, is something that's really a time saver and, one of those manual tasks that's now avoided. So we try to set up as many B2B vendors as possible to get all of those efficiencies and accuracy into the operations as possible.
Yeah, and you guys are covering, I mean, it's a lot of geography, a lot of DCs, all that stuff. So
Yeah, 30 plus DCs just for the main food vendors, and then others we use for Produce Alliance and Edward Don. And it's a
yeah,
huge time saver, not only to place those orders, but for the folks that are reconciling the invoices. Uh, just a major asset. Yep.
yeah. All right, good deal. So for purchasing, my favorite metric is the unit price variance, which shows up on the contract discrepancy report. So the idea here, the contract discrepancy report being an exception report, so you're only going to see things on this report that are different when they shouldn't be, this, given that you have some semblance of pricing, you're maintaining your prices and pack sizes, through a bid sheet, and basically that the system represents your agreement with your vendors on what you should be paying and what pack sizes you should be using. This report to me is just, it's one of the greatest reports we offer. So taking a 100-unit chain that purchases $500,000 of chicken in a month, and that's we have somebody that does that, and the bid sheet says 290. So the bid sheet is representing that you should be paying 290 a pound, where your invoice, you've been invoiced for 310 a pound. And 20 cents a pound, yeah, you think big deal, but when you start scaling this and finding that the 20 cents a pound when you purchase 500,000 pounds, that equals $100,000 or over $1 million annualized. And you'd be, well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but we hear stories like this all the time. It might not always be 1.2 million, but it, hey, we ended up saving, I don't know, $50,000 because of this, the discrepancy in the pricing versus, what we should have been priced. So it's great news for us to hear that what you're agreeing is what you're paying. And the other thing too is this report, if you scan this report and actually start looking at some of the outlying information, it's not always just this pricing. Sometimes it'll help you identify conversion issues too. So you've got something that seems way off, $50 for a pound of something when it should have been a case. Well, that's something for you to go correct the bid and just to make sure that the conversions are correct, so that downstream in your unit price valuation, that you're valuing your inventory the right way. So that's another way that this report can really help you. All right, so that's my favorite purchasing metric. Let's go into inventory value drivers. So Chuck and Michael have some stuff here. Chuck, why don't you kick us off on this one?
Certainly. Once again, I'll piggyback off of some of Michael's stuff, but the inventory, again, some of the flexibility, some of the key things that we use because of this complication of the different restaurants we have. When you utilize most of the things listed on here today, and I'll start with storage locations, the ability to sequence storage locations in the airport environment, space and real estate is a premium. We're having to store products every nook and cranny, really, sometimes that we're given, depending upon the complexity of the restaurant. So the ability to have that flexibility and be able to sequence inventory locations for the spaces that are provided is a huge benefit. And then I mentioned earlier about how we set up the company products to be able to share them across the organization. The alternate count units are really, really important at that point, because the inventory might be a common denominator to accommodate all the pack sizes. Therefore, we have to bring in now the local pack sizes that are attributed to that supplier. So that alternate count unit is really critical to add not only the main purchasing items if the inventory unit's not what they're buying, but also to speed along the inventory to make sure that we train and utilize the other ways you can count, whether it be eaches or the internal pack sizes, package, bag, whatever it might be. When you combine all of that in the different restaurants that we operate and the different storages that we have massive storage facilities that may be off site that carry everything by the case, but when they get to the airport, they're in a bag or an each. So to be able to flex in these different inventory areas is a huge saver for us. And then you couple that with a counter app that Michael will talk about, is just a giant time savings when inventory happens twice a month for us here in SSP.
Yeah, that's a great points, Chuck. Once you have the storage locations organized and sequenced and you introduce the counter mobile app to your teams, our restaurants cut the amount of time that they spent counting their inventory in half. It was virtually giving an hour to an hour and 15 minutes back in their day. And what that didn't do was, what that ended up resulting in is our managers and directors having more time to work together to review the inventory, to ensure that it was correct, that they counted things accurately, to question variances along the way in order to dig into what happens to our COGS every week. And so with the counter app, we also introduced daily counts, and we use those in restaurants to count high dollar items that are impactful to COGS. Example, at Logan's, they count their steaks every single day, and they're able to know based on their menu mix how many steaks they should have in the building. But getting everybody involved in counting and researching because of the counter app and the storage locations, at Logan's, the first year that we introduced crunch time, we reduced year 2, our COGS went down 1.4%. And we attribute a lot of that to the ability to count more accurately, count faster, and spend the time researching and understanding where your food has disappeared.
And if I could add to that, it puts the people back on the floor if you're saving that much time. And I can attest to Michael, it saved us 50% when you combined all of these this efficiency. We did the math. It was 50% in some of our bigger locations. And it puts the manager back on the floor, taking care of the customers, working, all of the other stuff on top of having time to analyze and scrub the inventory. So yeah, really, really good stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Good comments there. So let's get into the metric that I like best. And I don't know that any of us would disagree here, but the inventory variance is huge. And this is during the inventory review process, or later on, if you go look at the physical inventory summary report, you've got a scenario here where, a manager, a location manages a high volume of bacon. So let's take us through getting a book. So we've got our beginning, we've got our received, our sold, and then our adjusted. So that's all the stuff that, we're keeping track of so that we have a perpetual and accurate book value. Well, that puts us at 500 for the week. And if we physically count 350, you've got physical minus book, you've got a variance of $150. So I would tell you that, and I'd be interested to know if anybody would disagree with me on this. By the time, oftentimes what you'll see when you get to the AVT report is something having to do with accounting error. And so if you take a first pass at really focusing on that variance, the physical minus book, and addressing, maybe it was a mistake, maybe it's a problem, maybe it really is loss, but maybe it also is a mistake, or, there's something in that line. But, if you're looking at that and what could be, the components of that, the reasoning why your variance is like that, and if you're constantly addressing these, especially the higher number variances, you're going to chip away at it and keep getting better. And I think that one of the biggest things I wanted to say here is that addressing the inventory variances, don't just jump to the AVT report. Make sure that, building on what Michael said, you're saving some time on the counting. This gives you maybe a little bit more time to potentially look at, the reasons, why things are happening. Do that before you get to the AVT variances, and just make sure generally to understand that there are 2 different types of variances, step 1 and step 2. Okay, so let's shift into COGS and talk about some things here. Michael, over to you.
So, Steve, one of the most interesting aspects of crunch time is the utilization of the theoretical equals actual flag. What we try to teach our restaurants is you control what you have the ability to control. You can't continuously chase ghosts. And the best example for this is I used to get calls all the time in our previous inventory system from restaurants that said, I'm out $70 in A1 steak sauce or ketchup or mustard, and they're worried about those items, which calculating a theoretical for is virtually impossible. Instead of worrying about the fact that they, lost 35 6-ounce sirloins and they should be spending time working on the grill. So we take a lot of those noisy items out of the equation by using the theoretical equals actual flag. And so that our managers are not chasing ghosts. They're focused on the items that they actually can control. And in addition, we started encouraging them to enter their waste each day into the system. So that doesn't impact your AVT or your variance, but what it does is if you're missing $1,000 at the end of the week and your waste logged is 300, then we're only researching $700. We're not researching where all 1,000 went. And again, allowing them to focus on what they can control in the building and instead of what's out of their hands.
Yeah, once again, I can't agree more with some of the things Michael mentioned. That theoretical equals actual, use it the exact same way. And things that we can't control, tabletop condiments, self-service coffee bars, the milk, the skim milk, the oat milk. Anytime we have any of that situation, COVID took care of a lot of it for us. But anytime we have that situation, we turn on that flag. I love the word. We use the same terminology, chasing ghosts. Couldn't agree more. Waste is the other piece to pay attention, and that explains some of the variance, obviously. But then on top of all of that I agree with Michael on is the flexibility again with the inventory counts. We really stress the fact that everyone should do a really thorough scrub of their inventory, obviously. But the way we can do that in crunch time and sort the extended inventory values, look for those big anomalies first, items with zero cost that had counts on them, is a really great way to fix those easy, I call them low-hanging fruit, before you start to look at those AVTs, going back to the chasing ghosts kind of analogy. So great features there. In the airport business, we rely on the prep functionality really heavily. Again, space is a premium, so we do a lot of commissarying of recipes. And then to move those batch of recipes around the different parts of the airport, in some cases off-site. They start off-site. That prep functionality allows us to create something to transfer through all of the other activity. It's updating the ingredients, the recipe cost, and now we have a way to confidently and accurately move recipe items, not just ingredients, across the system, and have, again, those inventory values that are ultimately going to be inventoried at period end or mid-period be accurate as possible. So the prep functionality for us is really great, and we use it for those items that we transfer. The recipe items, I should say. So
yeah, that's good stuff. Okay, so this definitely won't be a surprise to anybody. Our favorite COGS metric is the AVT variance and the actual theoretical cost report. And so the point I wanted to make here is not just that the actual theoretical cost report is great and that is, I think helped customers save quite a bit of money collectively over the years, but the discipline of really getting into the line items. That's the beauty of the AVT report, is saying that in this particular example, if you were to just look at it categorically, theoretical 27,000, 26,000 actual COGS, great. I'm under. I didn't use as much as I should have, and so I actually, in this case, I grew $700. But if you get into the detail there, you didn't do so good. And there are problems, with the wings. That's what I said, a problem or mistake. With the wings, it looks like theoretical 22,000, actual 28,000. That looks to be like a problem that needs to be addressed. And this is the kind of thing where if you're looking at the top three, bottom three, so top three negative, top three positive, every week, discipline, interrogating these things and saying, look, we're going to fix or do the best we possibly can at fixing the top three, bottom three every week. Eventually, there's not going to be there won't be too much drama in the entire, for all the line items in the AVT report. Whereas the rib rack lamb, that one was, that probably is a mistake where, you've got a negative COGS amount for a theoretical of 5,000. So you grew quite a bit there. But that's the point, is that getting into the detail and having a culture that really wants to get to the bottom of these things, good linkages between the field and the folks that are doing things like managing recipes or supply chain at the corporate. That's ideal. You want to have this grind, this push and pull, holding each other accountable there. So this is a good one, especially if you're really getting after it. Okay, I think the next one is Michael only for labor. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you for your commentary.
Sure. Just a couple of things about, viewing labor through crunch time and Teamworks. So having our employees imported directly from an API from our HRS system goes into crunch time, goes into our POS system. And we run this integration every 15, 30 minutes daily. So a new hire can start very shortly after they've been fully onboarded in the HRIS system. There's no delay. There's no having to reach out to a POS side of things for them to get entered into the system. Nothing for the managers to do to ensure that that team member can clock in along the way. And so that's a huge benefit. It eliminates 3 or 4 steps that could get missed quite often. And in this day and age, when you hire somebody on Tuesday, you want them to start on Wednesday or Thursday. You don't want to wait a week on a POS team to get them set up and integrated and things like that. And when you add that in with the fact that, our time clock files are remediated into crunch time every 15 minutes. So we have a real-time idea of our productivity, of our labor percentage throughout the day. Those are huge assets in managing the business. And then at the end of each day or at the beginning of each day, you're able to look at your labor from the day before, review it. It tells you if there are overlaps or incorrect punches or long shifts that maybe got missed. And you're able to review, edit, correct, and ensure that everybody has claimed the correct amount of tips and not accidentally put in 1,000 instead of 100 and risk those kinds of situations with taxes and things like that. So having that ability to do that every day and have that real-time information to manage the business is why, the value of the labor system in crunch time.
Yeah. And I love that, Michael, that you said, the discipline of getting in there every morning, the next morning for the previous day. I mean, that not waiting till the end of the week, but I love that, the daily discipline, to make sure that you don't forget anything. It's easy to forget if you start getting throughout the week there. Okay, labor metric. There are a bunch of things that I would want to talk about. This particular one, you don't need to be doing much in order to get this, but the actual productivity report, this gives you your sales per labor hour, the SPLH. And so if you've got a target, hopefully you do have a productivity target that, it's basically we're taking actual sales and actual hours and giving you a productivity value. So in this case, if we've got a target of 55, there's probably only one that's kind of okay. I mean, you want to hit these productivity numbers, because if you're above or below range, that can speak to problems. So if you're above range, maybe in that 63 range, you might be running a little bit hot, and maybe guests weren't as happy when you're running that hot, or employees are getting burned out. Whereas below range, it's never a good situation. It's not only, you're going to be running a higher labor percent, and you can also probably speak to the idea of people are just standing around and they're not going to, necessarily be doing things real well anyway. So I like this metric, this productivity um, metric on the labor productivity report. Okay, last section to wrap up this piece of things, sales. So the sales value drivers. Chuck, why don't we go first with you on this one too? I know you've got some complexity that you're tackling, if you will.
Yeah,
with BizIQ.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So first, I have to say that the main UI in NetChef has awesome reporting. Really, really great. The thing I love about BizIQ, though, it's the reporting on steroids. It's customizable. You can combine different aspects from purchasing to usage in one report using a dossier functionality. So it's really, really cool. But we use, in regards to sales, we've created a customized menu mix or PMix that we use for a variety of things by adding some customized columns and features to that report. A couple of things we do with menu mix. Obviously, it's a great tool to understand menu performance, right? You can see easily the top selling items, but by adding in a couple of extra things, we have some additional charges when we think about contribution in our business. And some of the business, we have additional charges that apply, and we can now calculate those and see the true contribution of items when we have these anomalies or these different charges that are applied to some of our business. So it's a really great tool. We use it for this, one of our first steps in validating whether our recipe is correct, because I can simply add some filters and some sorting to see where we have unusual, low, or overinstated theoretical cost of goods. And the other piece that we use it by using some filtering is I can look at sections of menus and see how they're performing, either by keyword or by beer, wine, liquor, whatever it might be. And I can see within a restaurant what parts of the menu are working or not working, what are selling, what's not selling. So can't say enough about BizIQ. We use it for many, many other things, from purchasing and the things that I mentioned before in all different ways. But in regards to sales, it's one of my favorite reports. And the other benefit I have with this is the subscription availability for this. We can set up subscriptions, auto post or auto send menu mix reports to sets of or different parts and different departments of the business that use that information differently. So it's a great tool, BizIQ, really awesome.
Thanks, Chuck. And Michael, I know you guys are no stranger to BizIQ either, but you were gonna. Yeah.
But outside of BizIQ at the restaurant level, having the sales and menu mix remediated continuously and updated every 15 minutes allows us to have like a very accurate understanding of our on-hand book quantity. But it also has allowed us to develop some specialized prep reports along the way. Prep reports run by the hour. For instance, a potato chart that tells a restaurant when to load their first baked potato and how many, and then each hour when to load the next round of baked potatoes and how many. It allows us to create reports for day parts. So we have what we call the jerk box report, which tells our grill person how many 6-ounce sirloins they're going to sell at lunch. And that's how many they should bring to the line. That's how we ensure the quality and the control of the product. And then it'll tell them at dinner, you need to bring this many up. And so having that menu mix report allows us to give the restaurants a lot of guidance around product volumes and needs and help reduce waste.
Yeah, if I could add one thing that I didn't mention that Michael reminded me of is using that report also to establish PARs is a great way to, that's the beginning of the start of figuring out your safety stock. And we use that all the time. Yeah.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Okay, sales metric. I don't really need to tell anybody the importance of, the forecasted versus actual sales. Obviously, you want your forecasts to be accurate and your variance to be small. So the daily payroll control report is a great report. It shows you a bunch of things, but what I was focused on here is just seeing forecasted versus actual sales. And the most important thing, in addition to having a very small variance, hopefully you were good with your forecasting, but accurate sales forecasting in crunch time opens up opportunity for a lot of advanced functionality, suggested ordering, suggested prep, and then accurate scheduling for using labor staffing templates. But if you have that accurate sales forecast there, you're in that higher level of doing things. And I got to tell you, crunch time is really focused on cracking the code on getting exactly, using history and whatever we need to get you to have the system generate the most accurate sales forecast for you. And in fact, a lot of times if you have your settings correct on the suggested order tab of location, we are often beating, when a manager creates a sales forecast. The system generated numbers are extremely accurate if you're really paying attention to the tuning of how to what that output is going to be. So that's my piece on sales forecast. I know Chuck and Michael were talking a little bit differently about sales, but I wanted to make sure that we get out there the importance of the sales forecast too. Okay, a little bit more here, and then I'm going to ask Cindy to come back on and closing thoughts. The ROI. Hopefully, we've talked about this. Your distillery, your machine, continuously trying to make it better, leveraging as many value drivers as you can to get the highest ROI possible. That's what we'll want to help you do. Using key metrics, not necessarily the ones I said, but having your targets and which metrics you can look at that are going to drive your business, and then to continuously look out, working with your CSM to look for value drivers. How can we get better? What project can we work together on to improve? And we are going to be there for you. Okay, so Cindy is back.
Well, hello. Thanks for having me back.
Yes.
While we get started with Q&A, you'll notice a QR code on the screen. This is our latest ebook called Measuring What Matters in Restaurant Operations, and it has more great ideas for driving ROI on inventory as well as labor, operations, execution, and learning and development. So go ahead and scan that. And I will tee up the first question. So we have a few questions in our Q&A. Again, if anybody else has other questions while we're answering this first couple, go ahead and type them in. The first question I'm going to ask had 5 upvotes, so definitely a hot priority. And this one is to Michael. How did you get your store managers to get engaged and adopt crunch time?
That's a great question. It was a challenge, but it came from the top. The level of excitement has to be generated top down, and then the level of support that you provide during the rollout is critical. When we launched Crunch Time, we launched it in chunks of restaurants, 10 to 15 at a time. Our inventory counts are on Monday. Every Monday morning, the Crunch Time corporate team had a open live Teams meeting scheduled that every restaurant was available on. And we maintained that for 6 months during rollout in order to make sure that anytime anybody had a question or didn't understand how to read a report, somebody was available to assist them and walk them through that process. And over the course of 6 months, restaurants started to see their COGS improve. They started to see the benefits of crunch time. But ultimately, in the end, it comes from a top-down support and enthusiasm for the system.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Michael. The next question, I'm not sure who is best to answer to this. So maybe Steve, once I read it, it's a little bit long. Maybe you'll be able to recommend who's the best person to respond. So do you have any suggestions for supporting menu product recipe testing for specific locations of the same concept to accurately reflect inventory COGS and AVT data? For example, since recipes are universal for all stores, thus able to reflect new products or different quantities to assess ROI of the change.
I mean, this sounds like Chuck's world.
Yeah.
I knew you'd be able to figure out the right
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
I did a lot of this in my past life, so if I can get any advice here is do it in a quiet space, do it in a dedicated space. Take time to really thoroughly look at the yielding of the products first, that you're utilizing products that are going to perform well in the environment that in which they will be used in. Test recipes on the equipment that it'll be used on, so you have the actual performance of those menu items. Get really detailed. I got to a point where we tested everything in its yielded batch. So if you're testing soups, we had a kind of a rule that we would do it in 1.5 gallon batches. Some recipes scale up easier than others if you're using the scaling recipe feature, which I love in Crunch Time, by the way. But we did everything in 3. So when we tested a recipe, we tested it 3 times, or we weighed it 3 times, or we cooked it 3 times to get that average yield out of that product. So, just take your time, be super accurate. And that's my biggest recommendation. Do it in a controlled environment. Don't try to do it when you're bumping up against a grill cook or wherever you're at, because it distracts you. That's probably my biggest advice for making sure those recipes are perfect.
Great.
One other thing I maybe forgot: use the specified products. Get samples in from your suppliers. Use the ingredients that will be used in the recipe. Sorry,
Cindy, can I just ask Chuck one more thing on that? So, and then Chuck, you mentioned yields. I mean, that's sometimes, I'll at least see like, whoa, there either is a yield or it's like, what that yield is. Is that, are you sure about that yield? I mean, that's key too, right? Yeah.
That's important, right? You're using the right specified product, because different products act differently, especially when you talk about proteins and the amount of fat that may be in the specification, whatever it is, if you're roasting it or grilling it or whatever the application might be. And the other thing is to, again, test it a few times. And then you start to get, okay, on average, I'm getting this, because food's not perfect. It's never the same size. It's never perfectly on spec. There's variance for all of that. We did that a lot with produce. We over and over tested the yielding of certain produce. So you got to test it in the equipment, test it with the specified product a couple of times, at least twice. I recommend 3.
Great. So then we had a question: can you share more about using the AVT report to identify issues with recipes? But we actually had a helpful participant respond, which I'll read the response and then we can maybe add on if there's more. So a response was: a great way to compare recipe issues in the AVT report is to click into the theoretical cost of a line item and compare depletion to the other products that use that item. Anything more you'd like to add?
That's a great start. That's a great first answer. I encourage my restaurants to click on it, click on the theoretical, look at every recipe that they're getting credit for, look at the conversion, and come back to me and tell me I'm only getting credit for this amount, but I believe it should be this amount. The detail that you can go in to a recipe a restaurant can see is huge. My team is 4 people. And so we have 8 sets of eyes to evaluate recipes for 15 brands. We need the other 15,000 sets of eyes out in the field to help us to make sure that Crunch Time is as accurate as possible. And so we openly encourage our restaurants, click into the theoretical, look at the recipe, ask questions, send your thoughts along the way. And that's how we get to a final end.
Right.
Yeah.
If Chuck wasn't going to add something, I wanted to. I'm sure you could, Chuck.
I could
probably talk about this for hours.
Now, but everything.
Yeah.
Everything
One of
that
the
Michael just said, and it goes back to just the bare basics. Sorry, just the ingredients, the yields, the portions, all of that matters when you're talking about variance and how that's going to deplete out of the inventories.
Yeah, one trick I wanted to share too, and this has to do with the consolidated ABT, is oftentimes you might have a recipe issue if you're seeing a lot of like just consistent, maybe consistent high theoretical versus the cost, and it's consistent across 100 locations. That could be either a yield or something to do with the recipe. Whereas sometimes you'll drill into the location information for product like chicken wings, and you've got this massive variance, but it comes down to one location having an issue. So knowing that, to me, when you see the consistency, it could be a recipe issue. Whereas if you've got one location that's got a big cogs hit, obviously you've got a problem only at that location. So throwing that out there.
Okay. Question, maybe this is for Steve, but perhaps Michael and Chuck can chime in if they have experience with it. What are the primary benefits of utilizing the Reconciler mobile app?
Well, the Reconciler mobile app, there's a couple things there. One, not too long ago, I think it's been a couple years ago now, we've added the ability to place an order through the Reconciler app. So it's not just a reconciliation tool. So I love it for that. On the back end, you're talking about a tool that you can snap an image of, say, an invoice or a broken case, whatever you want, and you're going to get that image and directly imported into NetChef potentially. So I think it's some of these little extra things. It's not just entering an invoice. It's
Right.
these little tools that go with it too.
Steve, to piggyback on that, it's not just the benefit is our managers aren't taking care of guests if they're in the office.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Reconciler app, especially at most of my locations, receive key drops. So the Reconciler app allows the product to be put up and the invoice to be reconciled at the same time, ensuring that we've gotten all of the product, but also it eliminates the step of the manager having to go back into an office at another point in time and go into the system and reconcile the invoice and make sure that it's, they change the conversion on X or they take out this item and all of that, allows them to be out on the floor taking care of guests.
Yeah.
Great. A question, I think, for both Chuck and Michael. Are you integrated with a POS, and what system do you use?
We're integrated with 4 POSs at this point in time. We use Squirrel, Aloha, Micros, and we've just began a conversion to Toast. So we have integrated with 4 different POS systems. Our end goal is Toast at this point in time.
Chuck is
Chuck,
on mute.
Sorry.
It had to happen once during the webinar, right?
One version or one POS system, 2 different versions, Micros in our business. But I'll just piggyback onto the whole variance thing. It's a piece of the variance equation, is the POS accuracy. When you have complicated menus with a lot of modifiers, that plays a piece into the variance factor. And when you're looking at it, and for our business, it is complicated because our menus are different. So the last time I looked, we had 2.3 million transactions a week, all linked to some inventory recipe. It's a complicated piece of the puzzle that you have to manage.
Okay, we are just about at the top of the hour. I think we will call it here. So I want to thank our guests very much for taking the time to spend with us today. Really great insights that you offered. And again, I did drop in the chat the link to the Measuring What Matters ebook that you can also scan the QR code here. Please be on the lookout for the recording of this session, which we'll send in about a day, and then be on the lookout for our next Ops Innovators series coming later in the next quarter. Thank you so much, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.